Starting a new job is always a mix of excitement and nerves. When I landed a summer job at a local carnival in downtown LA, I was just looking for some extra cash before my senior year of college started in the fall. The carnival was a typical setup with rides, games, and food stands, but its main attraction was the fun house, which doubled as a haunted house after dark. It was actually a solid structure that I think used to be some old guy's mansion or something. I was assigned to manage the fun house, which was a favorite among the carnival goers. It seemed simple enough. Guide the guests in, ensure they have a fun, safe time, and observe them leave. At first, everything seemed straightforward. But then I started noticing odd things. It started with small discrepancies. I'd count a dozen people entering, but only 11 would emerge. At first, I chalked it up to miscounting. After all, keeping track in the chaos of laughter and screams was no easy task. However, as the days passed, the numbers just didn't add up. 7 went in, 6 came out. 10 went in, 9 came out. Was I going crazy? Something was off, and I couldn't ignore it much longer. One particularly busy afternoon, a blonde girl caught my eye as she walked up to the funhouse. She was drop-dead gorgeous, and almost seemed out of place amidst the childlike atmosphere. She couldn't have been more than a few years older than me. I genuinely had to do a double take. I'm not a weird guy by any means, but I couldn't help but lock eyes with her for a few seconds. She smiled, handed me her ticket, and I directed her into the attraction. After she disappeared into the darkness, I went back to my duties. Time ticked by, and I watched attentively as people entered and exited, sometimes asking me questions and whatnot. Admittedly, I was paying a little more attention to the guests that night, as I wanted to see that girl as she left and maybe work up the courage to talk to her. Pretty soon, I started picking up on the fact that groups of people who had entered after her were beginning to emerge. A few more minutes passed, and I started getting worried. She should have been out by now. Compelled by a genuine concern, I decided to abandon my post for a few minutes and go looking for her. I stepped inside and locked the entrance door. I began investigating, navigating the dimly lit rooms and narrow corridors. I moved through the house until I came across something I hadn't noticed during my initial walkthroughs, a barely noticeable seam in the wall. I'm not really sure what I was expecting, but curiosity got the best of me. I pressed against the seam, and I heard a distinct click. I played around with it some more, and my jaw nearly hit the floor when I realized it was a hidden door. It swung open slowly, revealing a pitch-black hallway. I stood there in shock. What in the world was this doing here? I was definitely going to have a long conversation with my boss about this. I walked into the hallway with my phone's flashlight guiding the way. I didn't have much brainpower to spend being nervous because I was still so shocked about the whole situation. I got to the end of the passage and found another door. I flung it open, and to my surprise, it was a concealed exit that led back to the carnival grounds. I breathed a sigh of relief as this discovery proved I wasn't going crazy. All those people I hadn't noticed leaving the attraction had probably stumbled across that secret door by accident and assumed it was the correct way to go. As I walked back the way I had came, I couldn't help but feel a little bummed out that I wasn't going to get the chance to talk to that girl. I'm not sure what came over me, but I decided to keep exploring the funhouse instead of returning to my post. I think a part of me just wanted a few extra minutes of this impromptu break I was taking. I walked through a couple more rooms, and that's when I noticed it. On one of the walls was another faint seam, identical to the first one I had seen. I again played with it until it clicked and swung open. I could immediately tell this one was very different. The putrid smell was the first thing I noticed. More concerning, though, was the fact that there was no corridor in this one, but a ladder that led downwards. I was more confused than anything. This door was on the ground floor, and I was told specifically that this place didn't have a basement. I debated climbing down, but I just felt awful about the prospect that the girl might be down there. So against my instincts, I began the descent. The smell only got worse as I climbed down into the darkness. I was expecting to find a basement, but what I found instead was far, far worse. I got to the bottom and pulled out my phone's flashlight. I was frozen in shock. I was literally standing in a tunnel that extended into the darkness. There was literally no way that this was part of the house above. The rational part of my brain screamed to turn back, to forget about it, but the mystery was too compelling. I ventured further, being careful not to make any noise. The walls were damp, and the tunnel was completely silent. As I explored, my flashlight beam fell on something unexpected. A white, glittery purse was sitting in the middle of the corridor. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. It looked familiar, and then it hit me. It was that girl's purse. I was sure of it. I started to panic. Was she really down here? I doubted there was any way a rational person could find this tunnel and not turn around, but the proof was literally in my hands. My mind started racing. Was she hurt? Lost? And then a more terrifying thought hit me. Was she alone? I didn't feel safe anymore, but I was in too deep. Violating every survival instinct I had, I yelled out into the tunnel for that girl. I waited. Nothing. I was just about to shout again when I heard the sound of rapid footsteps echoing through the tunnels. My first instinct was to run. I had every reason to believe whoever was running toward me was hostile. I turned around and bolted back to the ladder. I got halfway up and slipped, falling back to the bottom. The footsteps were basically right on top of me now. I knew I was done for. I braced myself for a fight, and then a voice rang out. A girl's voice. Her voice. She gasped, "Help me," clutching her side as if in pain. I yelled at her to climb up, but she insisted that I follow her back into the darkness for some reason. I told her there was no chance I was doing that, and basically forced her up the ladder. We got to the top, and I slammed the door shut. I asked her how in the world she ended up down there, and she couldn't really give me a straight answer. She kept saying she didn't really remember how it happened, just that she suddenly realized she was underground. She said she started hearing things moving in the dark, and that there were voices calling to her. I didn't know how to process this. I asked her if someone had guided her down there, and she said she didn't remember. The weirdest thing about her story was that she was looking at me with this blank stare that genuinely freaked me out. I basically interrogated her about why she told me to stay down there, but she didn't answer. I had had enough. I wanted to get as far away from this person as possible. I called the police, but she opted to leave the funhouse before they got there.